From the European Parliament here in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us tonight, and this is what we have coming up for you. Target Facebook, the tech giant's response to an unprecedented government pylon in London. Russia standoff. Moscow refuses to release captured Ukrainian sailors in the face of rising European pressure. Cost of being green. Is the Yellow Vest movement raising environmental awareness or exposing inequality? Space race. Europe's contribution to the Mars mission capturing the world's attention. And in tonight's Raw Moment, to remember the Baroness Trumpington and her famous two-finger salute. All right, it is time to meet our panel tonight. I'm joined by Jennifer Baker, a journalist focusing on tech policy and editor of BrusselsGeek.com. Jennifer, which of these stories do you like?
Facebook, obviously. It's right in my wheelhouse, and it's a big, exciting news today.
It is indeed. Everyone's watching that. All right, Nina Schick is also joining us tonight. She's a political commentator and director of polling at Rasmussen Global. Nina, which of these stories do you like?
I'm looking at the story about Baroness Trumpington. What a trailblazer, you know, Bletchley Park code breaker. They don't make politicians like her anymore.
No, not anymore. We do miss her. All right. And Roberta Metsola is also joining us tonight, Maltese MEP with the European People's Party, and she's on the Committee for Civil Liberties. So, Roberta, which of these stories do you like?
Well, I'll discuss Facebook, of course, but we could discuss the Yellow Vest movement as well later on, if that's all right.
Yeah, indeed. All right. Well, tonight we begin with the pylon that we were talking about on Facebook, an unprecedented proportion. Politicians from 10 different countries gathered in London today to grill Facebook reps in what has been dubbed the inaugural Grand Committee on Disinformation. Well, the company has been reeling from a series of public relations disasters, from its handling of user data to its alleged cover-up of Russian election meddling. And now the UK government is threatening to publish previously sealed documents that might expose the company further. Mark Zuckerberg declined the invitation and sent his vice president of policy solutions instead.
I'd like to welcome Lord Allen from Facebook to give evidence for us today. As you can see, we were still rather hoping your boss might make a surprise appearance, but nevertheless, we're grateful to have you with us.
Who gave Mr. Zuckerberg the advice to ignore this committee?
I wouldn't characterize the decision as a blowing off.
We've never seen anything quite like Facebook, where while we were playing on our phones and apps, our democratic institutions, our form of civil conversation, seem to have been upended by frat boy billionaires from California.
And in one of the explosive developments from today's hearings, Committee Chair Damian Collins revealed that according to those sealed documents seized from a California court yesterday, Facebook knew that Russian hackers hacked users' data way back in 2014. That was when the Kremlin began setting up the so-called troll farms. And here is that exchange.
Question, which is, and if you don't have the answer to it, I'd like Facebook to report back to the committee to say what internal process it ran when this was reported to the company by an engineer, and did they notify external agencies of this activity? Because if Russian IP addresses were pulling down a huge amount of data from the platform, was that reported, or was that just kept, as so often seems to be the case, just kept within the family and not talked about?
The context I'm giving is really to say any information that you have seen that's contained within that cache of emails is at best partial and at worst potentially misleading. On the specific question of whether or not we believe, based on our subsequent investigations, that there was activity by Russians at that time, I will come back to you, but I do want to set that context that those emails are unverified, partial account from a source who has a particular angle.
I mean, this is just one of the revelations in those documents. Jennifer, you were checking before we went on air whether or not those documents were real, and they weren't.
Well, we haven't got the full details of what those documents are. They were, as you say, sealed by a court in the US, but this hinges on this app provider who is 643, and they had this information, and they're in litigation with Facebook. And it seems like that their head panicked and was forced by Damian Collins to hand over these emails on a flash drive. We thought we would see them today. It really feels like the parliamentary committee there is looking for some sort of smoking gun on Mark Zuckerberg, but we know Mark Zuckerberg is very good at wiggling off the hook.
But the fact that we have information like that, I mean, you follow the Russian troll farms and you know, getting data illegally. Something like this is already big enough, you know, to catch attention. And what else could be unearthed from there?
this is clearly the Facebook story has captured the global public attention, but the problem that we're facing is actually much bigger than that. In my role at Rasmussen Global, I'm looking at the spread of disinformation and, the cutting edge AI technology, which is soon going to be hitting us in terms of how disinformation is going to spread, what type of content will be able to be created. So when we talk about Russian interference and Facebook, that is only the beginning of the start of an entirely new paradigm when it comes to disinformation and geopolitics. So.
And it feels like it's so much bigger. The last time Jennifer was here, she was talking about how these tech giants are actually bigger than countries. So is this a way forward where countries have to actually come together to go against these tech giants because one country can't do it alone? Is that the way?
Yeah, I think the fact that we're now talking about countries going against tech giants is so much further than what you said at the beginning, a public relations disaster. This is what Zuckerberg has been using as an excuse time after time. Every time each scandal bigger than the previous one comes out and says, yes, we managed the PR badly, but ultimately the philosophy of our company is still the same. I think today, more than ever, we have to question whether that can be used for much longer as an excuse. And when we're talking about countries dealing with these tech giants, I think, yes, we need to move forward and look at a sort of new diplomatic relationship, create digital ambassadors in governments, because ultimately the regulation we have is not enough to deal with these data mining, the fact that so many individual consumers' accounts are being used for private corporate purposes, that we as politicians, but also government, have to see how to protect their citizens, as you said, against these tech giants.
If you have a hearing like what we're seeing now, the optics is make for great PR for the governments. You see, you have an empty seat that reserved for Zuckerberg. Yeah. But at the same time, what does it really accomplish? The genie's out of the bottle. You can't put it back in. The Cambridge Analyticas of this world, they're out there. Our data is out there. What does this accomplish?
Well, I mean, Facebook is the very public face that we all as consumers and internet users recognize. But I mean, there's these very enormous shadowy data brokers they're the real tech giants, I mean, Facebook's just the front end advertising that's delivering the data to them. And they are getting a lot of this legitimately because we as users are signing away our rights left, right and centre. And things like the General Data Protection Regulation are striving to sort this out. Things like the e-privacy regulation will maybe go further. But, unless you start educating kids about what privacy means and what it means to tick, OK, you can have my data, then they're going to, if there's money to be made, someone's going to make it. But at the same time, it's not to take away responsibility from the likes of Facebook because, there were, in those exchanges, I think the accusation was that it was a strategy to let app developers have access to users' data.
I mean, Facebook has kind of put every excuse out that they can. And I think what's becoming quite clear from this panel is that this problem is massive. The genie's out of the bottle. It's not going away. So there has to be a new paradigm, a new kind of regulatory framework, a new ethical framework, a sense of proportionality, and above all, digital awareness, digital literacy, because this is something that is not going to go away for the entire future generation.
So ultimately, it's up to users. Is that what we're saying?
Well, it shouldn't be, because that's really unfair then to put all that onus on them. But here's the thing, even if I'm a really responsible user, someone who has my number in their phone might be leaking my data. I mean, we would heard a lot in this hearing today about shadow accounts, which is, not as sexy and cool as it sounds. It's Facebook keeping data on non-Facebook users. And here, in the hearing, they were trying to downplay it, but that's very creepy.
Yeah, but okay, go ahead.
And ultimately, what you have to see is how these tech giants have approached regulation. It's one thing to talk about awareness, but they have employed thousands of lawyers across the member states in order to make sure that they're compliant with the regulation, whereas smaller companies, tech companies, startups, are overwhelmed by the new regulation. And that was the aim, was to keep these big companies in check, and it's the smaller ones that are having a disproportionate burden of regulation, which is not solving the problem.
I do think, though, that governments are still playing catch-up. You were talking about how big this is. So I think that is still the crux of the problem when it comes to tech and innovation. All right, another big story that we are watching tonight. Russia is refusing to release Ukrainian sailors captured and accused of trespassing into Russian waters near Crimea on Sunday. Now, Russia's security service has released interrogation videos of 3 crew members. Each admits to violating the Russian border, but it is not clear whether the sailors made the confessions under duress. Meanwhile, Germany has urged Russia to release the group, and Ukraine has declared martial law in response, citing a, quote, serious threat of Russian land invasion. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov talked about the situation in Paris today.
Но основное, повторю еще раз, зависит не от Совета Безопасности, не от ОБСЕ, не от каких-то других организаций, а от того, чтобы спонсор украинского руководства поставили ему на вид и жестко предупредили о недопустимости такой игры с огнем. И если украинская сторона, как и ее партнеры в Европе, заинтересованы в том, чтобы подобных инцидентов больше не было, очевидно, необходимо, во-первых, послать очень сильный сигнал Киеву, и не нам это делать, а тем, кто поддерживает очень тесные контакты с украинскими властями, чтобы таких провокаций больше не допускалось.
And joining me on the panel now to discuss this is Mark Demismaker, a Belgian MEP with the ECR Group, and Darren McCaffrey, our political editor. And still with us is Nina Schick of Rasmussen Global. All right, well, listening to that, Russia pretty much laughed off the condemnation or just shrugged it off. Is the EU then powerless against Russian aggression or whatever Russia has planned?
No, I mean, Russia is a strategic partner of the EU, so we have some leverage. But first of all, we have to realize and we have to see what is the nature of the people we are dealing with here. This is an aggression. Up till now, they have done it in a hybrid way. And they have denied even that they were at war with Ukraine. The little green men in Crimea, they were not Russian. Afterwards, it seemed that they were. The war in Donbass, no, there were no Russian boots on the ground. There were no Russian arms involved. They were, and they are. Now, for the first time, it's open aggression. This regime has never, I think, from the start, doesn't want to accept that one of his neighbors of the ex-Soviet space makes its own decisions about its future and its direction. That is the problem. Putin is obsessed now by his Russian Mir idea. And he wants to do everything to achieve that.
But the fact that it's still going on, and then Russia, I mean, the way that they react to whatever is said against them, it's almost just falling on deaf ears. I mean, there's nothing changes.
But I think the big question here is, of course, Russia wants to protect its sphere of influence.
Sure.
I mean, that is what nation states do. It's what we're seeing with China in the South China Sea. It's what the United States has done, obviously globally, but more particularly in its backyard, particularly in the Caribbean and Latin America. Unsurprisingly, Russia wants to do the same. And the way the world has dealt with Russia, many would argue, since the fall of communism, has actually led to this scenario.
What, in a more dismissive
that there has been no act of real support. And that it's still viewed as the kind of Cold War enemy. Now, the big problem with this is, though, that's history and we are where we are. How does the West deal with it? Angela Merkel spoke to Vladimir Putin yesterday. The West has got leverage, but it's very, very minimal. And clearly the leverage that it's tried to lever in the past, particularly with sanctions, has really failed.
I understand Darren's point. And, you know, you only need to look at Russia for 10 seconds to realize that what happens in Ukraine is far more important to Russia than to the EU. Nonetheless, this is what it is, and it is an act of aggression by Russia against Ukrainian troops in the Sea of Azov. They've been repeatedly doing quite aggressive actions there. Russia invaded and captured Crimea. I mean, I work with the former Secretary General of NATO, and we've been on the front line in Ukraine, and it is a full-out war. It is not just a hybrid war, but it is a full-out war.
I can tell you, I've been at the front line myself. I can only confirm this. We were targeted with Grad missiles. Where did they come from? You don't buy them on eBay. They come from Russia. I mean, this is, and we have leverage. Putin just, you have to speak his language, I think. He needs to understand that he will pay a price.
So when you speak his language, though, what does that mean? You have to meeting missiles with missiles?
No, you have to, I never said that. But first of all, you have to extend the sanctions. You have to tell him,
this doesn't work. They don't really care.
It will work, but you have to extend the sanctions. And we have seen a continuous militarization of Crimea, of the Black Sea, of the Azov Sea. We need a bigger presence in the Black Sea. We have to...
You're talking military presence.
It's the only language he understands. That's the language of force.
So, Nina,
we have to deter him. We have to deter him.
I think the interesting thing is, the kind of international rules-based order. I mean, Russia and many other authoritarian states are an obvious breach of that. And Russia and other capitals around the world are watching as red lines are constantly breached and then seeing how the Western transatlantic alliance reacts to it. And if the response is half-hearted and weak and it's just angry words, or, you know, in the case of the White House, no words at all, then that certainly sends a message to the likes of Putin.
All right, let's go to Kiev now, because I'm joined by Catherine Quinn Judge. She is an analyst from the Crisis Group. Catherine, you being there on the ground now, martial law in Ukraine, the tension has escalated. What is your reading of the situation? How bad could it get?
Well, first of all, we need to point out that while there was initial concern that martial law would be put in place for 60 days and would extend to the entire country, after it appeared that Parliament was going to be perhaps unlikely to approve this measure that the President suggested yesterday, the President then came back with a countermeasure to have martial law extend only for 30 days and to be put into place only in 10 provinces of the country. So those provinces that border Russia are adjacent to the Sea of Azov, and in one case that are adjacent to Transnistria, which is the Moldovan breakaway entity that's heavily supported by Russia. Now, this is significant because what it means is that as things currently stand, the martial law is not going to eat into the election campaign season. We have a presidential election scheduled for March 2019. The president is highly unpopular. Most polls show him losing in the second round of elections. And there's been a lot of speculation that he was seeing this escalation in the Sea of Azov as a good opportunity to install martial law and therefore put off the elections. Now, this posed the risk of compounding the situation in the Azov Sea with more civil unrest within Ukraine, as people who were discontented at the sense that the president was trying to delay the election, potentially let off steam. So yesterday's climb down is a good sign.
Yeah, Catherine, what is the end game you're seeing from both sides here?
Well, Ukraine believes that the end game in Russia's case is to, as they say, annex the entire sea of Azov as they've annexed the Crimean Peninsula. In Ukraine's case, it's much harder to say what the end game is. We do know that Poroshenko has seen shows of strength in the Azov Sea, to the extent to which Ukraine is capable of shows of strength, obviously, given the extent to which it's outgunned and outmanned by Russia. But Poroshenko, the president, has seen sort of shows of strength in the Azov Sea, such as pledges to install a new naval base on the Sea of Azov by the end of the year, as a way, again, to consolidate his public support and really to sort of consolidate his Ukrainian nation-building program that he has going. So as things currently stand, the situation in the Azov Sea is potentially for Ukraine. It's an opportunity to show the country's determination and its cohesiveness.
All right, thank you for that. Catherine Quinn Judge from the Crisis Group talking to us from Kiev there. All right, so there was a climb down from Poroshenko. What do you make of that?
I think what's interesting, and our commentator is right there in the sense that he wanted 60 days and we've got 30 days, but Poroshenko risks making the situation even more advantageous for Russia. First of all, it only covers a bit of the country, but it still covers only half of the population, 44 million people. The fear is that it starts with 30 days, it does get longer, it does build into these elections, and that essentially martial law, which has not been used in the country, I think, since the First World War or after the First World War, for a very long period of time. And there have been more serious situations in Ukraine in recent years than this. So what is his game? And the other fear is that other countries, let's say Georgia, let's say Armenia, let's say Moldova, are looking at what's happening there, looking at the increasing use of laws to ramp home their political advantage, and may well start doing the same. So I think it's a really dangerous path to go down, and I'm not entirely sure what martial law is actually going to achieve.
I was wondering that. What is it? How is it supposed to address what's happening with Russia?
Well, this is an emergency situation. I just repeat, it's the first time that there is a direct military confrontation between the two, an open confrontation. I think the measure is measured. It is limited in time, limited 10 oblasts, so that's limited in what the territory is concerned, and it doesn't interfere with the elections. And I think it's measured, but it shows determination of Ukraine. Don't forget, it's of the utmost importance. There are two important harbors, ports, that of Mariupol, I've been there, Berdyansk, which are very important for the economy, for the social situation of the people in the southeast of Ukraine.
To bring back
and Ukraine as a whole.
To bring back Mark's point, he was talking about military confrontation, military presence of the EU. Is that really the way to go? I mean, Russia's going to say, well, you're provoking us now, and that gives them ammunition.
I mean, the EU can, of course, continue its recourse as it did after the invasion and annexation of Crimea, and that is sanctions. I do not see any situation where the EU or NATO would be involved with kind of boots on the ground. And I think the interesting thing, of course, is to look at Ukraine as ground zero of Russia's kind of hybrid war. We've seen kind of the military incursions into the eastern half of Ukraine, but also simultaneously when it comes to cyber attacks or disinformation campaigns, Ukraine has long been the testing ground for some of Russia's foreign influence operations that now reach as far as Brexit or, you know, the US presidential race.
Yeah, but being
no doubt that if Donald Trump sees an opportunity to sell missiles to Kiev, he will. He will. That will be the US response to this situation.
Absolutely. And just to bring in, you know, a bit of what Russia has been saying, do they have a point? Do they have any point in this? I mean, we understand what there are
international agreements, UN agreements on the use of the seas and international law on the seas. There are bilateral agreements between Russia and Ukraine about the use of the Azov Sea. It is a common sea. It's not an inner lake for Russia. Russia tries to seize this and to use it as an inner lake of how do you say that in English? But of course there are agreements and there are economic, of course, consequences if they don't live up to the rules.
So I'll give you the last word.
I think it depends on how you perceive of the world. So if you think the world is, you know, needs to have an international rules-based community, then Russia's flagrance of those rules is clearly something to be alarmed about.
All right, well, we'll leave it at that for the moment. Now, coming up on Raw Politics, a lot more for you. As Theresa May continues to sell her Brexit deal back home, the European Union's top court deliberates on whether the UK is allowed to unilaterally leave the Union. Plus, after violent protests in France, President Emmanuel Macron refuses to back down on his energy policy. But is the cost of going green exposing inequality in Europe? Don't go away. Welcome back to Raw Politics. The EU's top court held an urgent hearing today on whether Britain could unilaterally back out of Brexit altogether. A group of Scottish politicians hoping to stop Brexit with a second referendum brought the case to the European Court of Justice. Now, it is now up to these judges to decide whether the UK can legally back out of Brexit on its own, or if it would need the existing 27 EU members to back such a move if deemed legal. It would mean a third way for the UK beyond Theresa May's deal or the dreaded no-deal scenario. The ruling will centre on the famous Article 50 of the withdrawal agreement, which lays down the law on leaving the EU, but does not say if a country can change its mind. Well, joining me in the studio to mull over Brexit's judicial fate, I am joined by our political editor, still with us, Darren McCaffrey, Catherine Styler, who is one of the Scottish MEPs who got this case to be heard at the ECJ, and John Proctor, who's a British Conservative MEP with the ECR group. Catherine, I'll start with you. You're one of the MEPs who brought this to court. But isn't this playing into the hands of Brexiteers? You know, here you have a European court overturning what was decided in the UK.
Not at all. I think this is about democracy in action. I think we need answers on Article 50. It's never been triggered before. And the government has said one thing. We're challenging to get clarity. And I think we all need clarity at the moment because Theresa May's deal looks as though it won't get through the House of Commons. And then we're left with a challenge ahead. And obviously I advocate for a people's vote. I think we should put it back to the country and say, what do you think? Because now we've got a 590-page document and a political declaration, which is what our alternative is to full membership of the EU.
Do you have any idea of which direction it's going to take or any inkling?
Well, at the moment, we look as though there's going to be a vote in the House of Commons, 10th, 11th of December, we think.
2 weeks today.
2 weeks today. So 11th of December is going to be vote in the House of Commons on the withdrawal
What about Article 50, I mean, with the ECJ?
On Article 50, just the court has now finished, it's had its deliberations, and there will be a quick judgment made, we've been told. So we will see what that judgment is. Now, I don't know whether that judgment will come before the vote in the House of Commons, and I think that's going to be very
timing. It's going to be pretty quick, I think.
Yeah.
But what do you think, John? Do you think that if the decision, let's say, were to be, all right, you may unilaterally withdraw, I mean, would this have any impact at all? Well, either way, actually, would it have any impact at all on Brexit?
We've got to be clear. We've got to be clear about this. It's not just the British government who are saying this. It's also the European Council, and it's also the Commission that have said, actually, it takes all of the 27 to come up with an agreement that we can rescind Article 50. So it's not fair to say it's just the British government who are pushing this this position. That isn't the case. Will members of Parliament in London vote to revoke Article 50? Not a chance. Not a chance, in my view.
To be fair, I was just saying the withdrawal agreement. I think what has happened today, I think there's three options that the court will come up with. There's three things, isn't it? Either they'll say, no, you can't. Either they will say, yes, you can. Or they will say that you need yes, but you have the provisions of the other 27 saying you can do that. Now, at the moment, there is a lack of clarity, John, and I think getting the court to decide that, the sad fact was that we had to take it to the court, and then, was it just last week, we were nearly in the Supreme Court because the UK government challenged it. But I think now we're getting clarity, we're getting somewhere, and I think that's very important.
Darren, the word unilaterally, I mean, when we talk about the European Union, it is about a common decision, consensus. What kind of precedent does it set,
I think the best bit about today is the fact that the lawyer, because this is, John is right, something that unites the UK government and indeed the European Union, or at least the Commission and the Council. They do not want any country or indeed the UK to be able to unilaterally say that they can strike it down. Herbert Legal was the lawyer representing the European Council. What a name for a lawyer.
How apt.
But their case essentially is what they do not want is countries essentially triggering Article 50 and then changing their minds a couple of months later or a year down the line and just creating more and more uncertainty. At the moment, the way we understand it is that it can only be revoked if, I think, both sides agree it should be. But there is a lack of clarity because we've never been in this situation before.
Absolutely.
And I agree, I think the chances of it happening are minimal, but it is unbelievably possible because we are incredibly
careful choice of words. But then, what kind of precedent does that set when countries can unilaterally make a decision or reverse their decision?
Well, the first thing is that we've never been in a situation that anybody has triggered Article 50 before. I think that's the situation we find ourselves in, and we now are in a situation also in the UK and UK politics because it's now down to the House of Commons whether the withdrawal agreement will be yes or no, that, and the Article 50 clock is ticking. I'm on a different side, I think, than John is. I believe that now we have the prospect of what it looks like to take back control.
Referendum.
Well, I think now we're in a situation.
We're not going to have a second.
We're in a situation where if the House of Commons decides next week to reject the Prime Minister's deal, then we are in uncharted territory, and that's where the people's vote becomes so important, because we now have this 590-page-old document which shows what it looks like to be outside the EU, and it's up to the people of the United Kingdom to decide whether they want to be out or whether they want that agreement. And at the moment, if they want to be in within the European Union or they want that agreement, and the moment
I'll give you John, I'll give you a quick response to this.
This is all very interesting for political nerds like gathered around here. In the real world, that this just isn't happening. What signal does it send to the voters in the UK? They said very clearly that the largest democratic exercise in the whole of the UK. They said leave the European Union.
You may say that this is unrealistic, but Sir Michael Fallon, the former Defence Secretary, was on the radio this morning suggesting Article 50 may well at least have to be extended. So, that's a real possibility that many Conservative MPs are talking about. It is not entirely unrealistic to suggest
and
that it might have to be revoked.
We do have a lot.
So I think that's what we've got.
On Brexit as well, because this is not the only thing that we have for this program, because Brexit news, there's a lot today. Let's take a look at what else is going on so we can talk about it. Here's our Brexit brief. Ready, set, go. Theresa May's tour of the UK kicked off today in the heart of the Welsh farmland and Northern Ireland. The British leader will travel up and down the UK, trying to inflate support for her Brexit deal. With just 2 weeks to go, the clock is ticking.
Bad deal and no deal.
Minister!
They've gone head-to-head countless times before, but never like this. The gloves are off as Mrs. May has challenged opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn to a live TV Brexit debate. A provisional date of December 9th has been set just 2 days before the all-important Parliament vote. And finally, adding fuel to the fire, U.S. President Donald Trump has dropped another Brexit bombshell. Speaking to reporters, he let slip that not only does May's Brexit agreement benefit the EU, but it could harm trade with the U.S.
Sounds like a great deal for the EU right now as the deal stands. They may not be able to trade with the U.S. And I don't think they want that at all. That would be a very big negative for the deal.
Let you react to that, John.
So Trump, what he actually said was, "We need to look at it." That was edited out of your piece. He said, "We need to look at it." What he then went on to say may not have been so helpful.
That
but
Donald Trump
we
has
need to
almost
look at
certainly
it.
not looked at it, or indeed possibly understands it. That might be a controversial view, but
Indeed.
I'm not sure.
And very quickly, Theresa May is gearing up for, trying to convince so that she gets her vote.
Absolutely. It's always good to see politicians out and about and out on the road trying to convince the electors of their policies, whoever the politician actually is. So I'm really pleased to see that the Prime Minister is going and doing that. And what I do think is really very interesting as well is from all of the coverage I've seen so far of the Prime Minister out and about on the road today, she's met with positive responses from ordinary voters.
Can the ordinary voters convince the MPs?
Well, I think Theresa May should have gone to Scotland a lot more and listened to people of Scotland who voted to remain part of the European Union. And I think now we're in a situation where her deal is going to be rejected in the House of Commons because in maths the numbers don't seem to stack up. And my country is about to crash out of the EU on the 29th of March, which is not in anybody's interest. So that's why I am advocating for a people's vote. We need to put it back to the country. Democracy got us into this mess and democracy can get us out of this mess.
Quick wrap, Darren.
And all I would say is, yes, she does seem to be having some impact actually on the British general public. There is a sense that she is winning some of them over. However, opposition within Parliament seems to be hardening.
Yeah.
We're up to about 95 Conservative MPs who now say they will reject her deal. And in Northern Ireland today, what did Arlene Foster say to her, the person who's meant to be in the confidence supply deal? That she should stop all this. She's wasting time. She should get back and renegotiate.
That is interesting.
It is not looking easy for
because she's talking to the people now, trying to get their support, but it's actually the MPs that are going to give that decision, and they're hardening, as Darren was saying. All right. After the break on Raw Politics, deny. U.S. President Donald Trump challenges a new climate report that was produced by his own government. Don't go away. Welcome back. As pressure builds, French President Emmanuel Macron is refusing to back down in the face of nationwide protests against a fuel tax hike. Now, today, he used an announcement on France's energy priorities to slam violent protesters while trying to strike a conciliatory tone with the rest of the so-called Yellow Vest movement. Let's take a look.
Je ne confonds pas les casseurs avec des concitoyens qui veulent faire passer un message. J'éprouve de la compréhension pour ces concitoyens, mais je ne céderai rien à ceux qui veulent la destruction et le désordre. Nous devons donc entendre les protestations d'alarme sociale, mais nous ne devons pas le faire en renonçant à nos responsabilités pour aujourd'hui et pour demain, parce qu'il y a aussi une alarme environnementale. Je dirais même plus, c'est que les inégalités sociales et territoriales que dénoncent à juste titre aujourd'hui nombre de nos concitoyens, elles sont bien souvent doublées d'inégalités environnementales.
Well, the Yellow Vest movement has spilled into other countries, including neighboring Belgium, and morphed into a stand against inequality. Born on social media without a single leader or political affiliation, it took a violent turn in Paris at the weekend, leaving 30 people injured and 101 arrested. Protesters argue they're not against the energy transition, but rather unfairly shouldering the financial burden. This has placed fair climate policy at the top of the agenda days before Poland hosts the UN's annual climate change conference. All right, back with me to talk about this is Mark Demesmaeker, a Belgian MEP with the ECR Group, a member of the Environment Committee, and Nina Schick, Director of Data and Polling at Rasmussen Global. And still with us, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor. All right, you're part of the Environment Committee. They're saying, this is not about being against being greener. It's just really a matter of not being able to afford it. Mm-hmm. And there is no support at the moment. Is there enough support from the EU at the moment for people who have to deal with the consequences of becoming green?
No, I think there is an issue. There is an issue. We will all have to pay a price. The question is, who will pay which price? If we don't pay the price now, it's the future generations who will pay much more. We've just seen the report of the ITCC on they made a study, the difference between 1.5 degrees of global warming and 2 degrees of global warming. It makes a huge difference. So we will have to pay a price. But of course, we have to make sure that the strongest shoulders pay the highest price.
Because if you say something...
Because now we have an issue, indeed. And, we have some ideas about it, but okay.
Because people who are just trying to put food on the table, I'll just, going back to France, the Le Journal du Dimanche on November 18 found that 62% of French people give the highest priority to purchasing power, even if it means delaying the energy transition. And broadening this to outside of Europe, I mean, it's really all about being able to afford, becoming green. This is, it opens a can of worms. It's inequality.
I think it's a question of priorities, and I think that climate change is obviously a huge global priority. So in order to make the transition easier, it is, I think, imperative that governments put policies in place that those who are the most disadvantaged or feel the pinch the most when it comes to their wallet are able to make that transition easier. I mean, look at the CAP in the EU. We can find a way to subsidize European farmers, and I think that, of course, a lot of money and policy thinking has to be put behind this transition, because I don't think we have a choice. It has to happen.
Is going green elitist, Darren?
I think it is, in the sense that, I mean, this is an argument that's clearly been made for growing economies like India and Brazil and elsewhere, saying that, for you had a 150-year head start, really, essentially in the West with the Industrial Revolution. You pump lots of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere with very few consequences economically for those countries. And clearly anything that's too punitive for developing nations will essentially mean that they won't abide by the rules and they should be allowed to economically grow. And that's the global argument. The problem in France, and I think what Emmanuel Macron was trying to achieve today was, this is a protest about diesel prices and about the taxation of them. Many feel that it is too high. Today he tried to link it to, a wider discussion about cleaner energy, talking about closing down nuclear power stations, which are clean, but putting that back by 10 years, closing coal-fired fuel stations. I'll get there in the end. But ultimately, the problem for Emmanuel Macron is that the environment and climate and the cost of it is never simply about the environment. And that's for these protesters and for many French people that support them, this is not simply about the environment, it is about a punitive cost of living. And that is where the balancing act needs to come into.
Because, the climate conference is happening in Poland, and Poland is one of those that will lose a lot of jobs and industry if there is really this push towards climate change, addressing climate change.
Yeah, on the longer term, they will profit from it. All studies point out that there can be a win-win situation also for the economy. What strikes me as a politician, what strikes me as a politician is people are concerned about climate change and clean air. Here in Brussels, school children are rallying for clean air near their schools. People are starting cases against their government because they do too little, in Holland, here in Belgium, too little about climate change. And then, when it's about concrete measures, then there is a problem with some, because these measures are not measured, let me say, are not modulated. Why not? An idea that we put on the table, for instance, is in Belgium, is very, very simple. Instead of raising the fuel prices, the taxes on fuel prices all the time, instead of taxing people for the possession of a car, why not what we call like a congestion charge? You pay only when you contribute to the traffic jam. That means that people living in remote areas will have serious tax cuts. That's a smart solution. It is possible. We have put this proposal on the table. This is the way you can convince people to contribute.
So putting an incentive, very quickly, Nina, is putting money into it to support the consequences for people a solution?
I think it's part of the solution, and I think ultimately it comes down to incentive structure. And one point about whether or not this is elitist, I mean, I grew up in South Asia, and often we talk about the global problem and how, it's unfair that the West puts these demands on the developing world. But increasingly in the developing world, at least the developing world where I grew up, the sheer impact in terms of quality of life means that even the very poorest
they suffer the most as well.
Suffer the most and are aware that this is an issue that they cannot afford to shirk because it literally is killing their children.
All right.
I was joking, though, earlier on today that there was talk about these protests, which are in France now. They've moved, I think, to Italy and in Belgium, that if they came to Brussels trying to stop the traffic, I don't think anyone would notice because it's so bad.
It's already bad.
It's already ground to a halt.
The yellow vest movement indeed has brought up the green conversation to the top of the agenda. All right, well, now let's move on because the US government has just issued its own environmental warning. It's released a 1,500-page report compiled by 13 federal agencies and 300 scientists focusing on the threat of climate change, as we're talking about, and extreme weather. But the reaction from US President Donald Trump has left many speechless. That's tonight's You Said It.
Yeah, I don't believe it. No, I don't believe it. And here's the other thing. You're going to have China and Japan and all of Asia and all of these other countries, addresses our country. Right now, we're at the cleanest we've ever been, and that's very important to me. But if we're clean, but every other place on Earth is dirty, that's not so good.
Strong reaction from our panelists here. Mark, you were reacting.
Yes. I haven't read it, and I don't believe it, yeah. I mean, it's not religion. A religion you can believe in or not believe in. It's a scientific report, for God's sake. Read it, and then judge it. But I don't believe it. Some people, they will always deny because it's a case of believe or not believe. It's not about that. There is scientific proof.
Science. All right.
Maybe they just need to rake more forests and it'll all be fine.
There we go. On that note, so we're going to go to a short break. It's touchdown on Mars, thanks in part to some European scientists, and we'll look at what's next for EU space exploration. That's coming up. Welcome back to Raw Politics. There were scenes of jubilation around the world yesterday as NASA's spacecraft made an historic touchdown and the InSight probe touchdown on Mars, concluding a 160 million kilometer journey to the red planet as people watched all over the world. It is hoped that the spacecraft will provide scientists with a valuable understanding of the mysterious planet, and it would not have been possible without a significant contribution from Europe. A German-made drill will dig down into the red planet to measure its internal heat, and then you have a French-made seismometer which will be on the lookout for earthquakes, or Marsquakes as they call it. The two countries' investment in the project totals 159 million euros. All right, back with me to talk about this, our political editor Darren McCaffrey, Nina Schick from Rasmussen Global, and Jennifer Baker with BrusselsGeek.com. All right, we're looking at this space exploration. We're talking about the funding. Let's look at this in the context of Brexit. After Brexit, what happens then? I mean, the UK would not, how would that work? The UK would be going it alone. There are calls for the UK to have their own space program. What happens then?
This is where Brexit meets reality.
Indeed,
and where it gets
does.
very petty UK, they can't be part of the EU's space program Galileo, and then the UK says, well, you need us, or we'll set up our own agency. I mean, realistically, it's in everyone's interest to work together on these projects, but of course there are political consequences depending on how close the UK ends up being vis-a-vis its future relationship with the EU. I think on something like this, the politics aside, they will try very hard to work together. I think it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, they've said quite clearly on the record, we want the closest possible cooperation and friendship with the UK. That's the European Space Agency have said that. However, there may be issues with, with where you can put bases, where you can do the research, where you can do, and Greece is one of the countries that's very keen to step in and pick up some of the
opportunities.
Yes, let's put it that way. Yeah.
And I think you have to remember when it comes to space, actually, a bit of competition and division does no harm at all.
That's right.
The space race, man would not have landed on the moon if it was in some ways for the Cold War. You know what, maybe a bit of competition between Britain, France and Germany on space wouldn't do any harm at all. But, you know, a further sign when you look at those statistics, what was $159 million from France and Germany? I mean, that is dwarfed by NASA, which I put in $800 million. You know, all I'm saying is Europe's space contribution is still pretty limited.
But the Copernicus is, you know, space Earth observation is 63% funded by the EU or something. That's a pretty significant amount. That's not to be sneezed at, Darren.
No, I'm all for it. I'm a big fan of space. I'm a big fan.
But even if the UK were to go ahead, because there is a push to have their own program, it will be so small in relation to everything else that's going on. What can be achieved in terms of, you know, space exploration, just the UK alone?
Clearly, it's shooting itself in the foot. I mean, we've seen across many instances of R&D. I think
there's like £1 billion in private investment, even £1 billion. I mean, that is nothing to compare to.
Yeah, but I mean, this also comes into the thought process of, and we're seeing this in the United States, and, you know, private investment is becoming more and more instrumental, as it should be, of course, in the space race. It cannot just be down to governments. But that is where, despite the argument I've just been making, where actually cooperation between different countries is really, really important.
So are you for a space race or not?
I'm for a space race between nations, but greater private investment.
So Elon Musk versus the UK is
well,
Brexit. Rocket.
Bring it on. Bring it on. But I think the one thing I would say is it is extraordinary how, despite the space race, space has united people. I think we're coming up to the 20th year that essentially there have been people people have always been not on Earth. So they've been in orbit, in the International Space Station for the last 20 years continuously. That's I think we forget about that. It's quite extraordinary.
Yeah, for people who go into space, I mean, I've met some astronauts. They don't see borders and politics. At least that's a good thing. All right, it's time now for tonight's Raw Moment. UK politicians are mourning the death of a universally loved politician, hailed as a trailblazer. Baroness Trumpington served as a government minister and even a Nazi codebreaker during the war. But she became an internet hero back in 2011 when she made a two-fingered salute at a fellow Tory over what she saw as a rude remark about her age. Let's take a look.
One stood on Remembrance Day at the War Memorial in King's Square in Bridgewater, and year after year, and exactly as Lord Faulkner said, one sensed there was a diminution of interest. The survivors, a few survivors from the First World War were still there. I remember meeting Mr. Harry Patch, who was the last survivor of the lot, I think, and gradually they faded away. And then the survivors of World War II started to look pretty old as well, as my noble friend, the Baroness, reminded me, I believe, claiming to be one of the only survivor, I think, in this House of those who gave great service to their nation in the Second World War.
I know. Nina, this was your favorite story.
I just love her. I love, that is just amazing. And a Bletchley Park codebreaker. I mean, what a woman.
Badass.
I've met her quite a few times when I was at Westminster, and I mean, she was such a colourful character, and that summed her up. She was cheeky, she was discursive, but clearly incredibly talented. As you say, not just a codebreaker, one of Margaret Thatcher's few female ministers, an incredible career, but someone who also, as I say, had a very cheeky, very funny streak to her, and an all-round legend, actually, that would be really, really... She'd retired from Westminster earlier on this year, but would be really, really
As Nina was saying, they don't make them that way anymore these days. All right, thank you very much for joining us on Raw Politics tonight. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. See you then.